Okay. Hi, everybody. Uh, well, I have myself a very sincere apology to give. It took three people for me to help me figure out how to go live. That may be a record for an individual needing so much assistance. And so I first, to to those others who helped me, thank you, and sorry to everyone for being late. I may be talking to myself, I don't know, um, but I'm going to continue. Our topic today is, in a general sense, about the process of how we advance both together developmental goals and environmental objectives. How do we enhance our livelihoods, uh, improve our health, make better our education, achieve the goals that we have in a human development sense that are economic and social and cultural and educational, and about the well-being of our bodies. But in addition to that, have that not only not compromise our natural environment, but enhance it at the same time. Conventionally, we've thought, I don't think the generation of today were brought up in this mindset, although this mindset is probably still in many, probably most countries of the world, mainstream, which is that if we were to grow in a developmental way, that inherently we are going to compromise the environment. I remember in the 90s in the United States, there was a reaction among policymakers and leadership saying no, that in fact we can have a better environment as we develop as a community and society. In 1993, I began in Morocco with the Peace Corps as a volunteer, and I assigned myself. I was assigned to the Toubkal National Park, but there are 150 plus villages surrounding the park in 5 different valleys, and where among that great high atlas space the volunteers chose to live were up to that individual. And I chose to live on the southern side of the Toubkal National Park, um, and which was the most remote and one where volunteers have not lived before my stay there. But that also the National Park Management did not have communication. The National Park Management is in Marrakesh, had easy access to the communities on the north side of the high atlas of the national park, but not on the south. You had to circle the atlas and then come around again, and it was a 24-hour trip. But before going there, I had a few months stay in on the outskirts of the village of Tassawergan on the north side of the High Atlas, about an hour and a half from Marrakesh. And what's interesting was that as we were assigned to with the Department of Waters and Forests, which oversees Morocco's 10 national parks in the country, for those initial, I think it was a month. That for the one time I stayed was for about a month. Later in my second year, I had proposals to write, and I decided to go back to that same house, which was a forestry post about a kilometer outside of the village of Tassawergan. Now, Tassawergan, this village, faces the Tachourt Reserve, which has the mouflon, a a wild goat, which in generations and centuries past were hunted. And now there's a protected reserve around the remaining population of that goat. And so the village has this reserve facing them on one side, has the national park on the other. And so they are feeling the constriction of these nature protection projects or entities. How can they grow when there are regulations that do not permit that? And so, of all of the 150 villages surrounding the Tupkal National Park, Tasawargan felt the requirements of the national park, the goals of the park, the most, and therefore had great sensitivities around the even existence of the Tupkal Park, because inherently, from their experience, it denied their opportunity to, for example, expand their plantations or to plant trees above a certain line on the mountainside. And so it was an immediate lesson of the difficulties of bridging not just the objectives of environment and development, but their representative bodies, which had at that time not enough communication, a measure of distrust, perhaps, not a record of projects that are intended to enhance the people, to offset what they lose as a result of the nature protected areas, which are situations not at all specific to Morocco. 6%, between 6 and 7% of the Earth's surface are protected via environmental regulations. And there are some hundreds of millions of people that depend upon that 6%, 6 to 7% of the Earth's surface. And the conditions I described in Morocco, the park people relationship conditions, are really characteristic of what we see around the world, and including that they're boiling over into conflict, actual conflict in cases, not in Morocco, but in cases we've seen. So that first month in Tasawargan, what I learned from the prior Peace Corps volunteers was a lesson that I'm so glad to have gained at that initial introduction into my Peace Corps service, which is that how are we going to be helpful toward communities and parks talking through their respective interests to a point where there is a shared understanding of a project, so that as we implement this developmental initiative and its benefits are being enjoyed and enhance the livelihood, health, education of the people, as that unfolds, we will be in a better position to accommodate the protected area objectives. For example, not grazing in a certain area that has a high concentration of endemic vegetation, so that the high peaks of Morocco, of the High Atlas, in the summer when the snows melt, that becomes the summer pasturelands for the community's goat and sheep. And so at that high elevation, not coincidentally, there also is a higher concentration of endemic vegetation life. By definition, endemic to Morocco only exists in Morocco. Morocco has the highest peaks in North Africa. at that very special elevation, so too grows subspecies that are unique to this country. And so, can communities not graze at that high concentration of unique vegetation life in exchange for development projects that offset any losses that they may incur as a result of not enabling their herds to graze at those high elevation points? And that takes, to achieve that condition, takes time, a non-linear experience, meaning that as communication unfolds, there's understanding and goodwill and the implementation of projects, but always a dip as with any relationship as they unfold. Let me give you an example of how that dip in the cases I have observed occurred. Now, and in the process of me saying that, I wanted to say this too, that the very first project, to my knowledge, in Morocco that captured this community environmental enhancement simultaneously was a Peace Corps project. I believe it was in 1991 or 92. It involved Brian Gay, a former Peace Corps volunteer, a wildlife biologist, and it may have involved Scott Estergaard, also an environmentalist volunteer with the Peace Corps. Now, what were they seeing? In a village called Aramt, which is along the trail, the most passed trail in order to get to Mount Toubkal. As hikers would go along that path, many would walk through a cemetery, the cemetery of the village, which, on the one hand, villagers are happy to have visitors and to accommodate their needs, but the walking through of a sacred space it was hard to bear, understandably. And so the Peace Corps volunteers, being with the people, understood that. And what they did was, and communicated that to the national park, there was an understanding, well, let's create, between all the parties, well, let's create a sign so that the visitors know what lies beneath the ground upon which they walk, and therefore will avoid stepping upon that special space. The volunteers raised, I think, a few $100s to put together a nice sign. The sign was put up, and there was, definitely in the Toubkal National Park experience, which is Morocco's oldest and largest national park, the first people park initiative that enhanced both parties at once. The visitors come, they enhance livelihoods. The people raised a cultural, religious concern. The park heard that, understood that. They work with Peace Corps volunteers. Together with the volunteers, a solution among everyone was found. A design of the sign was created among the parties. Volunteers came up with the few hundred the resources. It was done. Okay. And for me, coming in, just knowing that one initiative that was able to bridge the development environmental worlds, hearing that was I was able to start my 2 years of service knowing what I had to do, and not knowing what form of project it would take, not knowing the relationships between the community and park at the time, but I knew when I went to the south side of the highest mountains that uh, I needed to understand from the people what it is that they want most to grow, to prosper, to address the unrelenting poverty, to deal with the issues of waterborne diseases, which in the early 90s was taking a life or lives of infants from every single household, which is a beyond imaginable, but just the most wrenching experience when and completely unforgettable, and maybe even still the reason I'm still in Morocco when we hear mothers and fathers in community meetings where each one, all in that room, have lost a child to waterborne illness. And so as a volunteer, we're in proximity. We're our duty, our reason for being is to listen to the people. And I knew that, well, there's this national park there. If we can meet the needs of the people, can there be an accommodation of the environmental goals of the Toubkal National Park? And so, and there I was. I want to see if there are comments because I feel like, but you know, I have no idea. I don't see comments. Um, so for whatever reason, I do not see comments. Um, let me just say back to the earlier point of the how it is that why it is that the relationship between park and people ebb and flow, and what to look out for in your experience of helping communities and nature reserves um, bridges. Now I see comments. Let me see. You said Taya so appreciates this. I'm so glad because I thought I was talking to myself, which is okay too. Not the first time. Nina, what waterborne diseases? Well, um, you know, it's when we learn that diarrhea is deadly, especially when we don't know what to do with how to address it. One of the wrenching stories that on this matter is that as a Peace Corps volunteer, we are sent with a book called Where There Is No Doctor. And a friend who's in the village who sold fruits and vegetables, I used to sit next to him many days because as people would walk by to buy their fruits and vegetables, I would say hello, and I loved him. He was a great, great, great person, and he taught himself languages. So I gave him the book Where There Is No Doctor to learn English, and he saw a picture of a baby uh, in complete throes of diarrhea. How the skin becomes stretchable and wilted or wrinkled, and it's just it's harsh. And he said to me, "This is what my baby had." When he saw the picture, he said, "Read to me what I should do, what should be done, what's going on." And so, of course, I read about hydration, that we need to make sure that the child is, drinking because of the loss of life and fluid from the body. And that was the opposite to what he did because of the constant outflow from the child. They thought not to give the child water. And can you imagine the feeling of that father knowing in that moment that he had done the absolutely wrong thing and lost his baby boy? And so the most predominant, of course, bacteria and those kinds of you know uh, illnesses that come along. But I would say the predominant one is diarrhea. By the way, I told that story to his daughter, who's now in her 20s and has three children of her own, uh, and who was not born. Oh no, she was born at the time of that older brother that she once had. And I told her that just because that story changed my life, and it involved her father, and it changed my life because it showed how completely how we can address this form of horrific loss with such simple solutions as containing water, basoning water, piping water, um, not drinking from earth canals or water ditches, and the people would provide their labor in kind, and so that's why it was something I'll never forget. I'm going to look to see if there are any other thoughts. Well, you appreciate what we're doing. Thank you. Um, hey, Toby. Good to see you again. I'm sorry I'm late. Okay, so around the rump, we did and so that visitors won't walk upon the cemetery. So in a cemetery in rural Morocco, we know there's a cemetery there only because people will not graze their herd animals there. And so it'll have more vegetation than all of the areas surrounding it. And so I'm able to spot a cemetery in the High Atlas Mountains because in the midst of barren, eroding rubble, which is unfortunately what so much of the High Atlas Mountains has become with deforestation, there'll be a patch of green and growth of vegetation life. And thereby we'll know that there's a cemetery there. But we can't expect mountain hikers for their first time in Morocco to know that. And so in Arumt, a sign was built in 91 or 92, not by the people, the park, and with the support of Peace Corps volunteers. And I believe that was the first Park People project where both sides are enhanced. The goals are enhanced. Now, back to the issue, however, in 95, as a Peace Corps volunteer on the South Side, the people wanted cherry trees. Cherry trees are organic. They thrive in the cold. They were doing wonderfully on the north side of the High Atlas. And there was clearly an opportunity to bring them to the south side of the High Atlas. And we were able to raise $10,000 through the Small Projects Assistance Program, which is basically USAID funding that's given to Peace Corps. And we built a tree nursery there, as I recall, of 23,000 cherry trees. Now, those trees were distributed to the people. And when they're distributed, they're about a meter tall and take 6 years in order for them to bear fruit. And so the people planted them in their agricultural terraces. And what did the National Park guardians, particular one, do? They levied fines on owners of herds that grazed in high vegetation areas in the interior of the national park. So here they planted a meter tall stick, and environmental regulations were being enforced before any livelihood benefit were enjoyed by the people. Now, can you imagine that feeling? By the way, can you imagine the feeling of, for centuries, the Toubkal National Park area, the 10,000 square hectares, being the summer grazing lands for the people's herds? 50% of the park was a summer grazing land for just that community on the south side of the High Atlas. And so you're accessing what you feel to be yours over time immemorial. And then suddenly you're told not to do something on what you consider to be your land. And you're told not to do it because you planted literal sticks in the ground that have given you absolutely no benefit. And it's cherry, and people did not have experience with cherry, and so they're not exactly sure what benefit they will have. It was the most tense and uncomfortable days that I've ever experienced in a community in Morocco in my life. They felt that as the interlocutor, as the negotiator between the park and the people, that I had somehow led them into this injustice, and that they had threatened, which I completely believed was they might have done, to uproot the 23,000 trees, which in me and their position would have that similar thought and consideration. And so I'll always remember when I was able to bring the president of that municipality over to the director of the national park in Marrakesh, get them into the same room, and then I exited and let them work out a solution, which they did. And so here's the lesson, friends. Number one is that enforcement of regulations can only occur after the people have benefited in ways that they determine to be essential for them. And the benefit needs to measurably outweigh the costs that they incur. And so, and if that delicate balance is compromised, so too may be their overall relationship, meaning that if enforcement comes prior to benefit, it does not bode well, which is why we've seen violence in other countries when it comes to trying to traverse this environmental development pathway. Was I afraid of violence in this case? Remember, this is in the 95. This is the first major economic development project targeted for people that depend on the national park, and that was implemented. And so we didn't have any real prior experience whether at Toubkal or elsewhere to give us reassurance as we walk through this delicate situation. I wasn't afraid of violence, but I was very concerned that they were going to make a formal complaint to the governor, which would have not done well for me as a Peace Corps volunteer. I remember, here's another important lesson, friends, which I also learned through this experience. Now, it's a community. We're not homogenous within ourselves, so certainly communities are not homogenous. And so there are always groups that are for moving forward in the way I described, development, environment, bridged, and there are groups that are against it. And in this case, I would say the silent majority was for it, and a highly vocal minority group was against it, to where they were spreading fears that the national park was going to reintroduce there was a lion, the highest lion. Can you imagine? And in the 90s, without national park experience and all of that, and people, not, going through formal education, 90% illiteracy, people believe that the lion was going to be introduced. And so now, in that moment where the people were going to file a formal complaint against this project, against myself, against the Peace Corps, against the Department of Waters and Forests, against everyone involved, there is a temptation for me to confront those people who are against this and spreading rumors that are not true. And what I learned is that if I were to have done that, I probably would have ended any possibility of reconciliation. That it is up to the silent majority in this case, or it's up to communities within themselves to work out these different points of view, these conflicts within their own social group. And that's really, really important that as international or as even national supporters of local development, not from these areas, we cannot be the ones who confront those that hold a different or alternative interest to what sustainable development requires. It's tempting. Wouldn't I have liked to have said something? But I'm very glad I didn't, because the silent majority did, and that complaint was never filed. And so the two lessons: one is let development unfold first before environmental enforcement, and so that the people come along and even have the means to come along. And number two is when you do have these natural ebbs and flows, and when it is an ebb and there is tension, let the communities work it out. Now, did that mean that I didn't probe members in the silent majority to get involved? I think I quietly, ever so quietly did, but definitely nothing to more than an individual here or an individual there, because it would not have worked. They would have united against me, who will be leaving in some months, then, come along and confront the other people whom they have to live with for the rest of their lives. Okay, thank you, Elamri Mohammed. I haven't been to Arumt recently. I think the last time, now I passed through that valley a lot because oftentimes we go from Asni to Tedmemt, and so we have to go up the valley toward Arumt, Imlil Arumt, in order to get to Tedmemt. But no, I haven't been up that valley, and maybe it's a little unfair because that I haven't. But there's always this impression that Imlil Arumt. Now I know there are people who experience very significant poverty there, but they do have a lot more than other valleys of the Hiatus, having, I don't have the current numbers, but 10, 20,000 visitors going through there, particularly during the summer months. I don't think it's much more than 20,000, so you could correct me. I know the numbers in the early 2000s was around 10,000 a year. I know some people go up through Eureka, but not to the near numbers of experienced by Imlil Arumt. And so that's why we focus on the valleys that don't benefit from the passage of tourists. Let's see. So that's really, I guess, what I'd like to say. I guess I'll finish with this thought, friends. We'll finish with Tasawergon. Our director of projects, Amina El Ajami, she works very closely now with the village of Tasawergon. And with the support of the UNDP, in recent years, we've been able to first gabion along the river. The river was washing away agricultural terraces, and so the gabions prevent that kind of erosion. But also, very importantly, we built we supported the communities in their building of a olive nursery, almond nursery, which is managed by girls, young women in their teenage years, and which is an incredible thing, because now I want to say something, because the Robert Bosch College is a critical contributor to that component of the nursery, particularly the olive trees. And so to be able to buy the seeds, provide capacity building, the infrastructure surrounding it, and all of that. And so the Robert Bosch College, UNDP, allowed for the um, initial catalyzation, the initial bringing of the irrigation and the nursery. Now we've, through Robert Bosch College, have been able to build up its infrastructure, maintain it for not just this year, but for years to come, and provide more capacity building throughout going forward. And so that nursery is built right below toward the river from that house I lived in 26 years ago. And so this is my point, friends. So wherever you are right now, and we're all homebound, we're all in, hopefully we're able to walk outside. One never knows what will become of what's directly around us. If you were to tell me 26 years ago in that initial month where I learned the environmental developmental balance from a retiring Peace Corps volunteer, that in 26 years from now, there's going to be a nursery down there that UNDP and Robert Bosch College helped enable, and it's going to be entirely managed and run by women for their benefit, and they're already receiving some income from it through of monthly work that they're doing. It would have been an amazing shock, and I wouldn't even have understood what a nursery really is. And why it's a shock, because I wouldn't known that agriculture is entirely in the male domain, and what it means for young women to be able to take over that, and why olive is important, and what's the significance of almond, and I know there's some walnut there too, and why these trees are particularly special, and so and that we be of an organization managing 11 such nurseries with many, many more contracts to build additional ones in all different parts of the country. And so it's like that feeling that I'm sure you've had, at some earlier years, we're walking down a street, and then we're walking down the street with 20 years later with our children. And then there's a moment when you think, oh my goodness, I walked down the street when I was in grade school, and now I'm walking down the street with my children, and they're holding my hand, and that's unbelievable. It's that kind of feeling. And so I'll leave it at there. I'm going to look at your comments and see if there's anything to reflect. Thank you, Amanda. Yes, let's say something, El Amri Mohammed. We do not grow apple trees. Yes, you're right about apples being up in a Rumt and Imlil. Of course you are correct. It's in the other valleys, and it requires pesticides. And the problem of that is not just the spraying of apples and that getting into the water system, the watershed, which is an unbelievable problem, but that when we plant an apple tree on an agricultural terrace that has also almond or olive or walnut, that water from the apple tree flows into the other trees, and so therefore the other trees cannot be certified organic. And so the difficulty caused by apple is that it keeps the whole area from being able to secure a certification that would enhance the price and in almond double the price if it were to have that organic certification. Apple prevents that. And so one of the things that we do at the Hylas Foundation is that we are developing an apple cider vinegar proposal in the hope that if they did not spray those apples and they weren't perfect apples, but still viable for vinegar, that if we could guarantee the purchase of those apples to the farmers without them spraying them, and be able to have a processing facility into vinegar, that would not only enhance the value of the apples, but also allow us to broadly secure organic certification in these regions. So yes to apples. I understand why they grow them. It provides fruit over 4 years, where cherries provide fruit over 6, and walnut only you have to wait 10 or 12 years, and almond 6 or 8 years, apple just 4, and so a lot of farmers are opting for it. But it is a long-term pain that it will cause if they don't transition to what the blessing that they have, which is that they have a ton of organic alternatives. And I'll just say this, that the more remote villages higher up, who are more disadvantaged, more marginalized, without economic means, are usually ones that could not afford the apple trees and the pesticides. And so ironically, those areas can be certified organic quickly, sooner than the apple growing communities. And so therefore the value of their product can rise more quickly, and they can gain economic growth more quickly. And so it reminds me that the more marginalized, distant communities who couldn't go into apples just because of money can be certified and acquire wealth more quickly. And so I'm reminded that the meek shall inherit the earth, in this case, that the disenfranchised can get organic certification quicker than those who had means, spent it on apples, but cannot acquire organic certification therefore. So I guess I'll leave it at that. It's been 40 minutes. Again, I'm sorry I'm late. I figured it out. We figured it out why, what's keeping me from being on time, which the technical difficulty. And I guess I'll conclude with this thought, that what Robert Bosch College did and what the UNDP did in Tasa Weregan is deeply profound and I want to say eternally good. And I could almost mean that literally, because of how these trees, walnut, can live for centuries, for example. And so if we can replicate the Tasa Weregan experience by simply funding trees. The partnerships for these kinds of profound experiences are there. We can grow trees with teenage boys at children protection centers who experience great difficulties in their lives. And by planting trees with them, we'll build their employable skills and therefore their prospects when they leave these centers. We can we can plant trees in an interfaith way, with religious groups coming together to alleviate rural poverty through establishing nurseries and broader cultivation. And so I say this because, yes, we gave the Hylas Foundation $1 or $1,000 or $50,000 to plant trees. Yes, you did. And yes, I hope you do. But it's not just the trees. It is how those trees come into being and who manages and benefits from that. And if we can make it teenage young women, and if we can make it teenage boys who experience detention in their lives, and if we can make it interreligious, and if we can make it cooperative, managed, and controlled, then we're talking about social transformation, not just enabled by the bounty year after year that come from the trees, but from the people relationships that brought these opportunities into being and bring them into being every day. So support tree planting. I thank all those individuals and organizations who have, not just through the Hylas Foundation, but through the countless other groups that do similar work. But I will say this, when we go and spend $1 to plant a tree, just know this, that what matters is, as much as that tree, are the relationships to maintain it, and with whom and how and where and why and in what way they are being planted. And all I can tell you is I could vouch for only the Hylas Foundation, because our sustainability is not from the fact that the tree lives 500 years, but that it is based on the inclusion of gender and culture and age group and uh, and remoteness or proximity and all of these factors. And for us, it needs to go toward those who need it most and empower. So I wish you well. I hope you eat well. I'm trying to eat more. For me, it's about quality and quantity. I hope you're walking, and I need to walk more. I hope you're getting sun, and so do I. Hope I'm getting sun. But and in the end, I hope you're well and taking care of yourselves. So all the best to you, and I look forward to our next Facebook, which will happen on time. Bye.